You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today, just like any other day, we have a special guest. Today, we have a true honor talking to Amelia Kelley. She has an amazing book that we're going to be discussing. So today we are going to talk about her amazing book, Surviving Suicidal Ideation, From Therapy to Spirituality and the Lived Experience. She has an amazing resume, and trust me, it'll probably take me 30 minutes to say on the show. So I want you to do the honors for our audience and tell us a little bit about your professional career.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, first and foremost. So yes, Dr. Kelley is what I go by often in this world of psychology and self-help and all of that. But my clients call me Amelia. So I've been working as a therapist for 20 years now, and I have a special focus on trauma and trauma recovery. And a lot of that has to do with what this book is all about, which is one of the most, kind of heavy byproducts of trauma can be suicidal ideation. I have a private practice in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. I'm a professor. I've written a handful of books. I have a podcast called The Sensitivity Doctor, where I get to talk to thought leaders all around the world who like to explore neurodiversity, which is another big area of focus for me. I run a ADHD support group for women online, which I love. It's super fun. You want to have a good time, get a bunch of women with ADHD together in a group. It's a great time. But yeah, this is just my life's passion, and I'm super excited to be here to talk to you and hopefully get some other people out there learning about this book that I think is just so crucial for survival. So,
and your book, like you said, is very crucial, and I think it's a hot topic that we tend to think about. But it's good to have a professional to kind of break it down for the audience, so we have a better grasp of what we are actually starting to learn, because I think this is a learning thing that if we don't understand it, it's better to have someone who actually understands it to break it down for us. So when it comes to your book, when you look at the research that you did in order to complete the book, what was the process like for you to organize the chapters and also just fine tune the key points in the message?
That's such an important, interesting question. I've never been asked that in all of the interviews I've done about the book. So, Gina, who's my co-author, she is the one, she's the lived experience part of this book. And she and I sat down and just had a conversation about what are the things that she needed to know when she was recovering and getting through her own suicidal ideation. And then also a bit of what I've known to be true to be helpful for my clients. And so we sat down and looked at it kind of like the Swedenborg Foundation, the nonprofit that we published with, was a big part in this too. You come to what we kind of call like the forest of pain and suffering and trauma and suicidal ideation, and you're lost in the weeds in the forest, and there's all this going on to organize. And so that's kind of where we began. Like, what is it like to be in the thick of that? And then we progress through the different stages that pull you away from that, not just coping mechanisms, but things like forgiveness and things like she explores a lot of spiritual work and actualization. And I want people who listen to this to know that you don't have to be religious or follow a dogma to benefit from the book, because we talk about it kind of in a way that anyone could use these practices, even if they just use it as a way to connect with themselves. But then we move towards some of the most common therapies like internal family systems and DBT and art therapy and all these things that I do with my clients. And I try to give a little intervention snippet, something you can do on your own, anytime, anywhere. Because not everyone feels comfortable talking about feeling suicidal, but we need to change that. That's, I have to tell you, I have a client the other day. We were having a regular session, and he came in. He's a veteran, and he came in and told me that his brother-in-law had attempted suicide over the weekend. And he was so, and my client specializes in reporting on survivors and trauma and TBI and all these things related to suicide with soldiers. That's his life's work. So he was thinking, I, of all people, should have detected that my brother-in-law was struggling. I saw him this weekend. We watched the game. Everything was fine. And then he tried to kill himself that night. And he said, why? Like, why didn't I notice? And this is the major issue. They never knew because it's not an open conversation. It's not something we just normally, like, we ask each other, how are you doing? And sometimes we'll say things like, I had a rough week, or, I'm really busy at work. But how often have you ever had a conversation with someone where they've been so open to say that they've had these thoughts?
It doesn't happen.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
And or that we even ask, like, hey, have you ever thought about like what it would like to be unalive? Or have you ever thought of hurting yourself? I mean, it's not dinner conversation, like you're not going to open it up at a cocktail party with people you barely know. But on the other hand, what would our life be like, and how many more people could be saved if this was more normalized just in general? Because up to 15% of the human population documented have had these thoughts, only documented. That doesn't even keep into account all the people who aren't going out and documenting and sharing these thoughts. It's a much bigger human experience than I think we give credit for.
And also, your book, it outlines tools and exercises that leads to steps that give the person the ability to be enabled to heal and prevention, because that's another part of not just healing, but also what does it take to maybe prevent this from being something that happens again, as far as exploring again. So kind of touch on that to the audience, because there's a difference between healing and also preventing as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's one of the things too, even if you're not someone who personally has these thoughts, I said 15%, that's a small amount. You all know someone, we all know someone who has had these thoughts, even if we're not aware. And so even just reading this, I had a friend read, because it's my friend, read the book. And he said, I've never had suicidal thoughts, but the things that you spoke about in the book, like, spoke to me just, and how I deal with just suffering in general, because we're all human. So the prevention piece, I think, is that we all, not just people feeling the feelings, but people who love someone feeling these feelings, become more aware of what do you do even if they come to you. I think a lot of us have an initial fear response if someone says they're having these thoughts. That's not the way we should be responding. If someone comes to us and shares these thoughts, pause, check in, take a moment. It's not a crisis in this moment because they're talking to you. It's a myth that if someone brings it up, it means they're going to go do it. Pay close attention that they are talking to you, and that's the most important thing. And you can act on that, and you can be there for them in that moment instead of, my least favorite thing I've ever heard, it's a cry for help. Well, yeah, it is. It's someone saying, please help me. I mean, yes, that shouldn't be something we push away, but something we acknowledge.
You listen to Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Dr. Amelia Kelley, and we're talking about her book, Surviving Suicidal, Ideation, From Therapy to Spirituality and the Lived Experience. When you think about the holistic approach that, it's kind of like a fun word that people kind of hear nowadays, holistic healing or holistic, this and that. Mm-hmm. Kind of break it down. What does that actually mean when it comes to suicide prevention? And what does that look like for the audience?
So I agree with you that holistic is maybe potentially overused and misunderstood. The way I see it is, if you're willing to be holistic, you're willing to admit that you don't know all the answers and that you're willing to keep looking. I think that's a really important part of being holistic, that we don't just, stop the bleeding at the moment, at the point of contact. We also maybe consider, well, maybe I should move that coffee table I keep banging my knee on, right. So it's not just addressing the immediate thing. It's also, what are the things that precede that and that lead to it? And when you look at the body, there's lots of ways to look at that. It's funny. I don't call myself a holistic therapist. I call myself an integrative therapist, meaning I will integrate any and all things that are going to help someone and put them in my toolbox, because what works for you might not work for me and might not work for someone else. So I think being holistic within that one person is important, but then being willing to be integrative as a whole is super important as well.
When you think about mental health and addiction, and also how people go day in, day out with their lives. Everyone has a routine, and there's some things that people kind of sweep underneath the rug, so to speak. I guess what I'm trying to land the plane here is when it comes to that, and also trauma, you also highlight that in the book as well. What's some of the things you've seen based on your past experience, maybe some patterns of how those play a role in someone's thoughts of suicide?
Well, we do know that trauma is absolutely a huge risk factor for suicidal thoughts, especially interpersonal trauma. So when we consider trauma such as a natural disaster, my goodness, I'm from North Carolina, and there's, we all know what's happening here right now. And that's a trauma. That's a huge trauma. People are being upended from their lives. But the hope within these traumas is that there's still this ability to heal as a community. There's still this cohesion that can happen. The type of trauma that I personally see being really detrimental, and to go back to something like a natural disaster, if someone has nothing and loses everything, I urge you to reach out. My practice is offering pro bono therapy right now, actually, for anyone who's been affected by the hurricane. So if you share show notes, please share that, because that can lead to suicidal thoughts if you are, economically stressed or anything like that. But the thing I see a big connection between is interpersonal or complex trauma, where we feel like other people are no longer safe. Relationships are not safe, because what we've seen in the research and what I've seen in my practice is that one of the biggest protective factors against suicidal ideation is not feeling othered and not feeling on the fringe, like you're an outsider. Like when someone isolates or feels like they're all alone within their pain or their suffering or whatever they're experiencing, it increases suicidal thoughts. And so the scary thing about interpersonal or relationship or complex trauma is that it makes someone less likely to feel like they can trust people, and less likely to reach out for help, and less likely to be in relationship. And in relationship is where we find the most protective support that we need to combat these kinds of thoughts. So, and that's not even to account all the impact that trauma can have on the nervous system. And if you're feeling like you can't settle your nervous system, it's going to be also a risk factor. And you notice I haven't even mentioned depression. And depression is categorically one of the biggest precursors for suicidal thoughts and ideation, but it's also very connected to trauma, as you were mentioning, asking specifically about trauma.
And for people out there who might be feeling isolated or depressed, whether it's due to a disaster or just something that happened in their life that there will be a disaster. What are some signs that maybe a person might be in denial? Like maybe they're trying to fight and say, I'm not really depressed, but they might be depressed. If that makes sense.
It does. I mean, well, I always kind of joke that the healthiest people are actually the ones in therapy. I think there's a notion, a past notion that I hope is changing, that, something really must be wrong with you if you're in therapy, when in fact, the people who are willing to say, I'm human, I'm broken, I'm not perfect, I suffer, like the more that we're able to be vulnerable, essentially, the better. Whereas I get more concerned if someone doesn't have the ability to admit things like sadness, suffering, struggling. That's when I get more concerned. So speaking of, and thankfully he's okay. He's getting the help he needs right now. But the gentleman I was talking about who had attempted suicide last weekend, when my client was processing this, he said, I had no idea because he seemed fine. He never really talked about his time in the military. He never really talked about his struggle. He didn't say it was a problem. And to me right there, I'm thinking, well, that's a risk factor. If someone's not willing to say and to talk and be vulnerable and ask for help and support.
That leads up to my next question. When it comes to family, friends, communities, and our relationships that we have with them, what are some ways people can just kind of pay attention to maybe things that seem off, that can maybe signal, maybe I should check on this person and see if they need to talk about something, or if maybe it's just lighthearted, they want to hang out. What's ways that people can maybe see some off patterns to jump in?
Great question. And I think first and foremost, it's going to be different for everyone. But I think some of the things you want to be paying attention to, you just said the word pattern. That's crucial, because if your friend or family or loved one is normally a social person or normally wants to be involved in things, and you see them changing patterns abruptly for no real particular reason, pulling back, not wanting to be involved, not putting themselves out there, that's usually a risk factor. So isolation in different forms. You've probably heard the really intense risk factors, like giving items away, giving money away. And, that is real. That is a real thing, especially if someone has a plan or an intent and they're trying to execute the plan. You might even notice, and this is very unnerving, but you might notice an upswing in their mood as they've kind of come to this realization they feel control over their plan. But my hope is that with these open conversations and things like this book, or, having more talks about this, that we're catching people earlier in the phases of suicidal thoughts. Even things like increase in impulsive behaviors or dangerous behaviors, increase in alcohol or substance use, and someone not, being willing to process this or talk about this. It's good to just check in on our loved ones. It's good to just check in on, hey, I've noticed you haven't been around lately. Are you doing okay? If you're suspecting that your family, loved one, someone is feeling suicidal, also don't be afraid to just ask. It's a myth that asking and suggesting makes someone think about doing it. It's completely the opposite. If we unveil it and we talk about it, and this goes for children and teens and adolescents, we need to have the conversations. We need to not just pretend it's not there.
And speaking of make sure we're not pretending that it's not there, someone's listening right now and they might feel like they might need to get some help. We like to make sure we stress that on the show. Whatever you do, always seek professional help. That's the most important thing. What's something that a person can expect when they go to that next step of saying, okay, I'm going to contact someone professionally, whether it's yourself or someone in their area where they live at? What can they expect as far as resources, information, programs, different therapy techniques? What's a good picture we can give for our audience if someone happens to be in that good position, need that?
I love this question because I think sometimes people are afraid to ask or to report their feelings because of the fear of being locked away or thrown into an inpatient unit. And that just simply is not the case. We are all, as therapists, I can speak mainly from the mental health perspective, but I believe this goes across the board for other helping professions. We are trained to recognize that thoughts do not mean action, and that if you are having thoughts, it is better for you to come into my room and we talk and we make a safety plan. So for instance, if you came to me and you had suicidal thoughts, I would check in on if you have an intent to do it that day, that week. Are you active? If you are active and you are actively harming yourself or have access to something harmful, there is a chance that you will be hospitalized, to be completely honest. And I don't think it should be the worst outcome if it's what you need. If it's stabilizing meds, if it's getting resources. But my hope is that clinicians are trained and are getting better trained at understanding that just throwing people into inpatient is not always helpful. It can actually be harmful for suicidal thoughts. So you come to me, we come up with a safety plan. I make sure I'm not the only one who knows. We have a person in your life, maybe a professional or a loved one that is going to be on that plan. And then we're going to have a follow-up ASAP. We're going to be doing things like, distress tolerance training, making sure that medically you're stable, making sure that the people and loved ones in your life are stable, and inventorying whether the people you're spending time with are safe for you. Like sometimes it can be external factors that increase suicidal thoughts. So safety is crucial. I would not try to get someone to come in and do existential work or trauma work when they're in the middle of, like that deep suicidal ideation. We're going to get you safe first. And then we can get there. We can get to the stuff when you're ready and when you're safe. And I will say, if you bring this up to a loved one, I would say to your loved ones, please don't go alone on this. Please don't think that you have to shield these thoughts for this person and be the only resource to them. It's good to check in. Do you have a therapist or a doctor or someone that you're working with? Can we get them involved? Can we let them know how you're feeling? Because you shouldn't be the only one holding that.
This time, Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Dr. Amelia Kelley, and her book that we're discussing, Surviving Suicidal Ideation from Therapy to Spirituality and the Lived Experience. I can't believe time is already almost gone. It's like, what? But as we are almost to the close, before we let you go, what are some things that people may not understand about suicidal ideation, maybe from myths or just assumptions that you can probably help clarify so that they can have a better way to maybe help someone and they don't just kind of overkill and do too much?
Right. Well, I think if anything, myths and assumptions are my favorite things to debunk. So I've kind of been weaving them into our conversation, but I think it's good to kind of bring them all into a package and remind yourselves talking about this more is a protective factor. If someone talks about it, that's a sign that they want to live. Okay. So even if someone's actively saying, I want to die, as long as they are talking about it, as long as they are reaching out, as long as they are seeking resources, there is hope. And, Gina would say, and I love this about her, this is one of my favorite things about when I worked with her. She says that she is healed. She says she does not have these thoughts anymore. She cannot possibly hold one of these thoughts anymore. And, that is possible for some people. And for other people, I want you to know, if you're listening and you feel like, well, what if I don't have this thought for years and suddenly a crisis happens and I have a thought? Does that mean I failed? Does that mean that I've backslid? Does that mean all my progress is gone? My answer is absolutely not. The awareness that the thought is there, and the awareness that suicidality in a very weird way is a coping mechanism. It can feel like an old friend, someone that's there when things are so insufferably difficult that you don't know what to do. It's okay to name it, to know it, to get to know it, we work on like parts work in the book, like getting to know your suicidal part, understanding what it needs and understanding what it's trying to tell you. So instead of pushing this part away and thinking something is wrong with you, understanding that nothing is wrong with you. It's natural to have a very human reaction to the human experience of suffering. So compassion is number one in my book. And I feel like I could talk another 30 minutes about this question.
Yeah. I mean, I can believe time is up, but I'm going to break my own rules and go a little bit further. But my one more question I want to ask is,
Sure.
When you look at your professional career, you also are in meditation and yoga as well. So as we wrap this thought up, when someone is through the process of healing and they're sticking with what they learned through therapy and whatnot, how much can a change of lifestyle make a great impact on them if they were to practice meditation or yoga or something that just kind of ease their mind a little bit?
I love this because it's truly how I try to live life. I don't think coping mechanisms need to be looked at as kind of like an extra layer of work. I almost think it's a lifestyle. It's a way of like knowing that you deserve to be taken care of. You can start with yourself. And so I think it's important to know this when it comes to things like meditation and yoga. There's two things. First and foremost, you can do a coping mechanism. You can get the benefit in the moment, and then you can get off your mat, your yoga mat, your meditation mat, and then go into your life and not act meditative. And those coping mechanisms are not going to work as well. What you practice, the hope is that you can carry them off of the practice. So if you're meditating, practicing mindfulness and being in the moment throughout your day will make that meditation practice matter more. I think that's really important to recognize. The other thing though, too, and I do want to really preface meditation to be careful. There are certain forms of meditation that research shows can actually aggravate suicidal thoughts. So insight-oriented meditation, or it's called Vipassana, just like this very open air meditation, deep mindfulness meditation. When you're in the midst of suffering, it can actually increase the sensation of intensity. So if you're actively suicidal, it can be a better idea to use things like guided meditation, imaginary experiences, drishti gaze, where you have something beautiful you focus on. So you almost need something to anchor you, if that makes sense. But keeping that in mind, whatever form of coping you choose, know that it will help immensely with your distress tolerance, which is huge if you suffer with suicidal thoughts, because in the moment of stress and suffering, it can be so hard to look outside the tunnel vision of that suffering. But when you practice actively things like yoga, meditation, or whatever it is for you, cooking, art, I don't care what it is, it helps that tunnel vision widen, and it helps those moments of intense suffering feel less permanent. And that, I think, is the most important key.
Someone wants to find out more resources that you have and find out how they can maybe connect with you. What's the best place they can find you online? And also, if there's a particular social media platform you're active on, how can they stay in touch?
Sure. I love that you said particular platform, because technically you can find me on almost anyone, but the one I'm probably the most active on is Instagram. I find it the easiest to navigate. And my website is just ameliakelley.com, and that's Kelley with an EY. And I have access to everything there. My podcast, which is The Sensitivity Doctor. I've got my insight timer meditations. If you want to join my group, I have the application on there. I've got links to all my social media, my articles. If you want to book me for a workshop, like basically anything you want is on my website. So I think that's probably the best place to start. But I welcome questions too. Like if someone heard me on a podcast or something, I love when they send a question, and I try to answer them right in my posts as best I can. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Well, once again, you've been listening to Highly Focused Radio, and we've been talking to our special guest, Dr. Amelia Kelley, in her book, Surviving Suicidal, Ideation from Therapy to Spirituality and the Lived Experience. Time has flown and gone, but I appreciate your time being on the show today. I hope you have a good one.
Thank you. You too.